Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, Portugal, on the periphery and perhaps drifting further after the Constitutional Court blocked some of its reforms. We go behind the numbers and look at the real hurdles Lisbon's facing as it tries to keep the deal with the IMF on track. Also this week, it's not all bad news. A new report shows companies are starting to dip into their cash reserves and invest again. But are they perhaps jumping the gun in these turbulent times? And one company placing the emphasis firmly where the growth is by moving its entire headquarters to Dubai for a month. Hello everyone, we're starting in Europe this week. It's economic problems never far from the headlines. But the nature of the crisis is that usually one country grabs the headlines for a while before the woes of another simply jump in and take over. And so this week it was Portugal's turn to step up again as its austerity plans came in for scrutiny and then rejection. Remember, Portugal is one of the Eurozone countries which has actually gone down the bailout road. The previous Prime Minister, José Sócrates, pleaded for months that all his country needed was support and not cash. In fact, he told this very programme that.
At the same time we reduce the public deficit, we will grow more than 1.4%. This is two big figures of our national economy that give us confidence to face the challenges.
And yet everyone says you still need a bailout, like Greece did and like Ireland did. And I'm going to quote you. One moment, I'm going to quote you. This is 2 or 3 days ago. You said, "We are able to do our work by ourselves. We don't need anything else than confidence." That is a very, very confident standpoint when, if I make a great big generalisation again, everyone seems to say you need a bailout or will need one.
Well, sometimes everybody is wrong because we don't need that help. We don't need any kind of external assistance. We know exactly what we should do and we will do it.
In the end, of course, it was a €78 billion IMF loan which was agreed on back in 2011 with the usual raft of deficit targets and budget cuts attached. But this week, the politics and the economics went head-to-head with the courts and lost. Here's a quick explainer from Jackie Rowland about what happened in Portugal this week.
It was an unexpected setback for Portugal's government. A ruling by the Constitutional Court that some planned austerity measures were unlawful, which left the Prime Minister looking for other ways to come up with about $6.5 billion in savings.
Quero dizer a todos os portugueses.
I want to tell all the Portuguese that the government does not accept raising taxes further, which seems to be the solution that the Constitutional Court favours in its interpretations. Raising taxes would completely compromise our economy's ability to recover in time and to start creating jobs.
For Portugal's biggest trade union, the way forward is new elections.
The government does not have legitimacy to present alternative measures that always penalise the same people. The government from now on does not have the political, ethical or moral legitimacy to carry on governing.
All of this leaves Portugal in a difficult position with the European Union. Just a few weeks ago, the EU and the International Monetary Fund agreed to release the next slice of bailout money to Portugal based on the wage cuts and pension savings that the Prime Minister had promised. Now he needs to go back to the EU and convince them that he can make those savings in a different way. He's planning cuts in public spending. That won't help the growing number of people who rely on volunteer associations like this one for food and clothing. Portugal's unemployment rate is at a record high and it's still rising. So far, anti-austerity protests here have been peaceful. The challenge for the government now is to make sure that the financial burden is shared fairly between the public and private sectors.
So Jackie talks about a financial burden there. This is the scale of that, or indeed the size of the hole Portugal is in. The economy's shrinking for a start. That's your first big problem. It contracted 3% last year. And unemployment's still high. It increased from 12.7% in 2011 to 15.3% in 2012. Portuguese public debt was at 119.7% of GDP in 2012. That's high. It's the 9th highest, in fact, worldwide. And as we mentioned before, it's in hock to the European Union and the IMF, with loans amounting to $68 billion and $34 billion, respectively. Well, let's crunch all of that now with Raoul Ruparel. He's the head of economic research at Open Europe. And you know, Raoul, when you look at those numbers, what strikes me through all of that is that they're as bad as they ever were. You know, Portugal kind of dipped out of the headlines for a while, replaced by Cyprus or any other country, but it didn't get better in that time.
Very much so. I think markets and investors turned away from Portugal, looking more to Greece and recently Cyprus and countries that were in a more acute crisis possibly than Portugal. But things have improved slightly in some areas. You know, their exports are doing well, but if you look at overall, they're still struggling. In particular, domestic demand is collapsing, which is dragging GDP down. There's very little bank lending throughout the economy, and importantly, one of the key areas in terms of their improvement used to be cost competitiveness. They were improving their costs and they were returning to competitiveness, but actually towards the end of 2012 that trend has reversed, and that is a very worrying sign, and I think that's why now we're seeing more people looking at Portugal and it's coming back into the headlines.
So if those trends are reversing and things aren't looking so good, then how does Portugal keep to its commitments? You know, all those commitments it made to the IMF to get the billions of euros for the bailout in the first place.
Well, I think it's going to very much struggle to keep up with all these commitments. I think there will be a lengthening in the maturity of the bailout loan, so it eases the repayment schedule so it has more time to repay these loans. There will probably even be another easing of the deficit target so it gets more time to implement the fiscal reforms and the structural reforms that it needs to do. But I think even then it will struggle to meet all of its targets, particularly on the growth side. In that sense, I think it will have problems exiting the bailout programme. And that really raises the question of where do they go next? Will there be a second bailout, or will they get some more financial assistance? And it's looking increasingly likely that they will need some help, because their refinancing needs as they exit the bailout are simply much larger than they were when they were entering the bailout.
Do you remember, Raoul, a few years ago, how we always used to use that word contagion? It was always the buzzword, you know, all about all these problems spreading across the continent. Is that still an issue, or are things so bad in a place like Portugal or Cyprus or anywhere around the Eurozone that it's just bad? It's irrelevant?
Well, I think obviously with the introduction of the ECB bond buying programme, the OMT, and Mario Draghi's promise to do whatever is necessary to keep the Eurozone together, the contagion has definitely become much more muted and less of an issue. And that's why, even with the acute problems in Cyprus recently and in Greece last year, we haven't seen such a knock-on effect to the rest of the Eurozone. But as you say, the wider Eurozone is still in a recession and the growth prospects are still very poor. So I think although the contagion and knock-on effects may not be huge, this renewal of the crisis somewhat with Cyprus, with Portugal, and possibly with the political uncertainty in Italy spilling over, this is creating a feeling of crisis once again, and that could have long-term problems for the Eurozone.
So where do you see Portugal going from here, Raoul? You know, we could apply the situation there to any number of European countries. It's not growing. There are no real strong growth prospects. There's no sign of huge job creation. How much worse could it actually get in Portugal?
Well, I think it's going to get worse. I mean, how much worse is not yet clear. They're very reliant on any form of growth on exports, and that obviously relies on how the rest of the Eurozone does. Now, with the Eurozone still entering recession and unlikely to grow this year or much next year, I think the hopes for an export-led recovery in Portugal are a bit overdone. I think it's definitely going to get worse, and as Portugal is looking to return to the markets in September this year, there isn't much time for it to regain trust or for it to turn around its prospects, and I think it's unlikely to happen in time, meaning that it will need some more assistance at some point.
Raoul Ruparel from Open Europe on Portugal's woes there. Thanks, Raoul. And still ahead on Counting the Cost, the US-based global hotel company that upped sticks and moved its headquarters to the Middle East for a month. Gimmick or cunning business plan? We'll find out a little later on. Right now, though, a business question. Is there any reason to be confident right now? Confident about success and growth in the business world? We've just seen all the surrounding economic problems, but there is some research out there which suggests things mightn't be as bleak for business. We're going to look at that research shortly, but here's just a little something from Switzerland first to get us going. The International Exhibition of Inventions in Geneva, a chance to turn ideas into a real business. Here's Tim Friend.
Hundreds of inventions from all over the world, 1,000 new ideas that have been brought here to display. Of course, what everyone is after is backing. That's what all these inventors need. But some are faintly eccentric, some are deadly serious, some have the potential to save lives, and this is perhaps one of them, just to pick one invention, a solar-powered cooking dish that reflects the sun's rays back into the pot in the middle. Very good in remote areas, perhaps even for refugee crises where people are unable to cook. Erica Young, you're backing this project. You're a Hong Kong-based science and technology park. The ability to save lives, you would say?
Absolutely. Enough sun reaches the Earth in 1 hour to power the entire of humanity for a whole year. So we believe that this type of technology will help remote villages access that type of energy.
And you need the backing. You need the backing to make it work.
Absolutely. We have a pilot production run in Western China. It's been very successful, and we're looking to go into commercialize this summer.
Thanks very much. That really is the dilemma for a lot of these inventors here. You come up with a good idea, but of course the danger is someone beats you to it, gets it marketed first, so everyone is anxious to try to get someone to invest in their inventions.
But is there the confidence for that? Well, we mentioned just before some research on business confidence. It's the Grant Thornton International Business Report. And Ed Nussbaum, who is the CEO of Grant Thornton, is joining us now from London. You know, Ed, the thing which struck me reading your report was the bit about the cash reserves. Companies feeling confident enough to dip into those reserves and go out and spend them. I wonder, though, is it actual confidence, or is it that this is sort of money you save for a rainy day and it's actually still pouring out there?
Well, the companies are sitting on cash, as you know. In fact, in the U.S. alone, they're sitting on about $2 trillion worth of cash. And our survey shows that the confidence is there to make the investments over the next 12 months. We asked them specifically, business leaders throughout the world, will you make more investments in machinery and equipment, plants, manufacturing facilities, and other opportunities during the next 12 months? And they said overwhelmingly yes. Significant improvement from the prior quarter.
And with all due respect, what would it be? What on earth would it be that is actually giving them that confidence now? You know, are they going out there with that cash speculatively, also trying to make something happen? Because, you know, it doesn't really feel like the economic conditions are really right yet.
Well, I think there's progress in some of the mature markets. There's been stimulus programs in the U.S. and Japan, and there's continued success in India and China. So the general level of business optimism has improved. Even in a country like Germany, strong increase in business optimism. We asked specifically, are you more optimistic over the next 12 months about revenue growth, about profitability? And in most countries, the answer was yes.
All right, then, well, go back to Europe for me, if you would, Ed. Two things I want to ask. One, and you may have answered this already, but perhaps you can give me a little bit more detail on it. What do you think is actually driving that turnaround in confidence? And two, does it actually surprise you that there seems to even be that level of confidence in a place like the Eurozone?
It does surprise me because, you know, you hear a lot on the news, and if you're watching everything, you see the stock market going up quite a bit in the U.S., you see continued strength in China and India, some success in places like Dubai and other parts of the world. But we've been told that the European Union has been slow, and a lot of concerns, particularly most recently with Cyprus, previously with Greece, Italy, Spain. But a lot of the problems in Spain and Italy are at least somewhat resolved, and we're seeing a pickup there. But the biggest driver is Germany, and that's a very industrial economy, strong growth in manufacturing, sales to, of course, China, where luxury markets are booming, but also sales into the U.S., which is in a turnaround.
Okay, then, so tell me about the U.S. then, about the levels of confidence that you see there, because, you know, rightly or wrongly, we all still immediately look to the United States, don't we? We hang on those monthly job numbers that come out, which will affect any number of economic indicators when it comes down to it. How would you actually describe the confidence levels there, Ed?
Well, as you know, the employment numbers most recently were not as positive as everybody would have liked. But if you look at the whole quarter, the last 3 months, the results have been very, very strong. The fiscal cliff getting resolved before the end of last year gave a boost to businesses, a resolution of a lot of the issues. Yes, there's some payroll tax increases that people are concerned about, but in general, the orders are flowing in, business is picking up, and there's a level of confidence building within the U.S. Some concerns about decreases in government spending, but those aren't enough, at least as of now, to slow down the economy. It's still fragile, but the confidence is there, and it looks like over the next 12 months, business leaders are expecting very good results in the U.S.
All right, Ed Nussbaum talking some surprisingly good business confidence there. Thank you, Ed. Well, as we're talking business, here's an interesting business strategy now from a US-based company. Starwood Hotels, that means Sheraton, St. Regis, W Hotels, those sorts of names, has its corporate headquarters in White Plains, New York. But for 1 month, it did something radical. It took that whole US-centric operation and moved it to Dubai. Why? Well, Fritz van Paschen can probably tell us. He is the president and CEO of Starwood Hotels, joining us from Dubai. Convince me, Fritz, that this is not just a publicity stunt, that moving your headquarters for 1 month to another country and then all going back to White Plains, New York, isn't just one big gimmick.
Well, let me start off with a few things. First of all, to spend 5 weeks away from home, to move hundreds of executives in and out of Dubai for a month is a very expensive gimmick. But more important, this is an opportunity for us to grow and accelerate our business. We did the same thing in China 2 years ago, and we saw our growth accelerate. For example, in the year after we left China, our hotels grew 6% faster than their competitive set, and our signings for new hotels accelerated by 40%.
So just quickly talk me through the logistics of this whole thing. Are you saying that literally you moved your entire headquarters to Dubai? What sort of numbers are we talking about here, Fritz?
So the way this has worked is I've operated out of Dubai for the last 5 weeks, which means I've spent about half the time here in town and half the time traveling around the region, which is what I typically do anyway. My direct reports have been here, and then we've had a number of other meetings over the course of being here, just as though we'd been in New York. And that adds up to about 250 to 300 executives who've come through Dubai as part of this relocation.
So I'm guessing this is, as Shanghai would have been 2 years ago that you talked about, an acknowledgement that this is where the growth is, this is where the money is, this is where business comes to now.
That's absolutely right. So Dubai is a great example of a global crossroads, the way the rest of the region is as well. In fact, if you look at India, Africa, and the Middle East, we have as many hotels as we do in China and 75 under construction. So between this market and China, that's a huge part of global growth, not just for our company, but for the global economy.
But do you actually feel, and this is something we've covered previously on the show, do you actually feel that the confidence has returned to Dubai? You know, you'll remember, of course, the credit crunch which they had there, it's 3 or 4 years ago, I guess now. But it really hit people's confidence in the whole Dubai dream and made them question if this bubble that's there was, you know, real or not.
We've been operating in the region here for decades, and I've been coming here for many years, and I can tell you that even just between last year and this year, the level of confidence has risen. The other thing to keep in mind is, even in the dark days of 2009, our hotels here in Dubai operated at 92% occupancy. So the hotel business is very robust. We continue to add hotels here, and they're performing. If anything, I think confidence, not just in Dubai, but throughout the region, is above where it was before the crisis.
So you obviously subscribe to the local supply and demand theory then, you know, because anytime certainly I've gone to Dubai and I see all these hotels opening, see all this accommodation, I have to wonder, really, is there enough demand to fill it all? You know, this part of the world, the climate's not so friendly for tourists at all times of the year. There are drawbacks, but, you know, clearly you think the Middle East warrants all this expansion.
Yeah, there's no question. And in some respects, supply creates its own demand, as does airlift, by the way. Since we've been here, Emirates has signed a new deal with Qantas, routing all of their business to Europe through here. And let's face it, if you were going to operate a business anywhere in this region, between Africa, India, Central Asia, and the Middle East, it would be somewhere here between Doha, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait City. So there's plenty of opportunity for growth. There are about 4 billion people within an 8-hour flight, and those 4 billion people are getting more and more economically active by the day.
That is Fritz van Paschen, the boss of Starwood Hotels. Always good to talk to you, Fritz. And we'll stay with the United Arab Emirates for our final interview this week. A company called Crescent Petroleum and one of its subsidiaries, Dana Gas. Now, these are somewhat unique companies for this part of the world in that they are oil and gas businesses which are private, not state-owned. They've also become heavily involved in the oil and energy industry in Iraq, managing to supply almost continuous energy in the northern Kurdish region. Whilst attending the Doha Energy Forum, Crescent CEO Majid Jafar stopped by the studio for a chat. He started by explaining, first up, the impact of the economic downturn.
Actually, the effect was a positive one. The energy sector overall, obviously oil prices have been high and sustained. The last 3 years has been one of the most stable periods of oil prices in recent memory.
Stable but high.
Stable but high. Well, what's high? It's all relative. I mean, it would have been unthinkable. I mean, just 10 years ago in the industry, we had memory of $9 oil. And today, you know, that's a movement, that's potentially a daily movement in oil prices. But what's more important for both consumers and producers is stability. That enables you to plan both your income and your expenditure. And that's what actually all sides need. And despite the high, as you call them, and certainly historically they are high, oil pricing, that it doesn't seem to be having a disastrous effect on the global economy. There are other aspects, but there is economic recovery in many of the key economies.
Okay, so you talked about stability. Oil price has been stable, that's been good for you. The region has not been stable. As simple as that for the last 2 years, more than 2 years now. How has that affected your business?
Well, as regional players, we've always prided ourselves on addressing local needs first and foremost, whereas some of the big international companies are just focused on exporting, whether it's via LNG. And one of the impact on the energy sector and use of energy from the changes that we've seen in the last couple of years in the region is the priority now is on domestic use for energy and how you can create jobs, because the export revenues isn't enough anymore. Job creation, particularly tackling the youth unemployment issue we have in the region, is a policy priority for all governments. So how to use your oil, your gas in value-added investments, petrochemicals, heavy industry, which gives you more job creation and higher economic value add. And this is where, as regional private sector players who understand the local markets, who have good links to governments, we feel able to play a role.
What about wealth returning to the people? We know oil can create great wealth. The people of Iraq haven't seen that. How do you, as a company that goes in there and works on infrastructure projects and works to get the oil moving and the electricity moving, how do you actually make sure that Iraqi people start to see something out of that?
I mean, you're quite right. 10 years on, the results haven't been what was expected or hoped for.
Well, nothing's been what it's expected,
I mean, despite high budget, 120 billion a year is the federal budget of Iraq, still on a few hours electricity in much of the country, the jobs haven't been created, the security situation hasn't really improved. But what is important is, you know, for us as companies, is addressing the local needs, and I would say that's across the Middle East region now. You can't just rely on your contract and the ministry staying the same. You've got to make sure you address the local needs in the areas you operate. That's your best security. Your CSR activities, we've made sure in the areas we operate there's 24 hours electricity, for example, the only part of Iraq that has that. Working with the local communities, that's very important. For Iraq overall, it's got, in my view, potentially the highest oil and gas resources in the world. It's very underexplored. It's only just at the beginning of exploration. And the world and Iraq needs to make sure that those resources come to delivery and are monetized.
That was going to be my next question, just briefly. Is it being managed properly? I know there's still a lot of governance problems and issues of, you know, this is a broad term, but corruption. Is it being managed? Is it moving in the right direction?
Corruption is a problem, but even more of a problem is a lack of a coherent consensus on policy. The political parties haven't unified and agreed what the policy should be and how to maximize the resources. So a federal oil law still doesn't exist. It's been stuck since 2007. How to manage the revenues, they're meant to be shared according to population, according to the constitution. The mechanism for that isn't yet in place. So instead of being something that unifies the people and that they all have a common objective, it's become a cause of political bickering. And there were targets of 3 million barrels a day back in 2009, 6 million barrels a day in 2012. We're barely over 3 million barrels a day today. Still the second biggest player in the region and of growing importance, but the potential hasn't been realized, and it needs to be realized.
And that is our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/business. That's where you'll find the latest business headlines. Also a link to the Counting the Cost page where you can watch this or any of our previous episodes again. Then if you'd like to get in touch, please do. You can tweet either me at Kamal AJE, our business editor at Abid Oliver Ali, or just drop us an old-fashioned email to countingthecost@aljazeera.net. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.